I stood alone in court, representing myself, while my husband and his mistress laughed, calling me pathetic for not having a lawyer. The room echoed with quiet agreement, until the judge suddenly looked at his attorney and said, "You don't recognize her?" In that instant, the laughter died. My husband's face drained of color as realization hit. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to, because they had just understood exactly who they were standing against. My name is Cassidy. At 33 years old, I have spent the last 5 years living a double life that would make a spy sweat. To my husband, Bradley, and his insufferable inner circle, I am a quiet, unremarkable remote data entry clerk. I am the woman who wears sensible cardigans, stays in the background, and earns a modest $40,000 a year, a figure I meticulously engineered to keep him from ever looking too closely at my finances. He believes I am a nobody, a person he can discard as easily as an outdated piece of software now that he has leveled up in the ruthless world of investment banking. What Bradley does not know is that the woman he treats like a glorified secretary is actually a senior forensic accountant and the anonymous director of Apex Forensics. My firm is not just some local accounting office. We are the elite team appointed by the federal court to dismantle multi-million-dollar fraud rings. I have spent a decade hunting white-collar criminals and unraveling money laundering schemes that would make the hair on Bradley's perfectly groomed head stand on end. I have testified in sealed courtrooms and audited federal fraud cases under layers of high-level security. I kept this secret for 5 years, not because I didn't trust him at first, but because my work requires absolute anonymity for safety. Eventually, I kept the secret because I realized exactly who Bradley Reed was, a man who only values people for their utility and their perceived status. The destruction of my marriage did not start with a scream or the dramatic shattering of glass. It began on a freezing, rainy Tuesday evening, our 5th wedding anniversary. I had braved the miserable Chicago weather to pick up a vintage bottle of scotch he had been eyeing for months, thinking we would share a quiet night at home to celebrate half a decade of building a life together. I actually believed, for a fleeting moment, that we would open that bottle and reflect on our journey. I rode the elevator up to our luxury penthouse, entirely unaware that the man inside had already erased me from his future. When I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped into the foyer, the smell of celebration was nowhere to be found. Instead, the air was thick with the industrial, chemical scent of black trash bags. 6 massive, overstuffed bags were piled in the center of our living room, sitting right on top of the imported rug I had spent weeks selecting. One bag had torn, revealing my favorite winter coat and the professional blouses I wore for my remote meetings. He hadn't just packed my things, he had literally thrown my life into the garbage. Bradley was sitting on the Italian leather sofa, looking like the epitome of corporate arrogance. At 35, he was a senior director at a top investment fund, and he wore his tailored charcoal suit like armor. His dark hair was perfect, his expression devoid of any warmth. He looked at me with the same cold detachment he used when assessing a failing asset in his portfolio. "You were home early," he said, his voice flat. I stared at the trash bags, rain dripping from my coat onto the hardwood. "What is this, Bradley?" "Today is our anniversary." He took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink before tossing a thick stack of legal documents onto the glass coffee table. The sound of the paper hitting the glass was final, like a gavel. "Those are divorce papers," he stated. "I already signed. Do not bother reading through the asset division. It is ironclad. You get what you came into this marriage with, which is essentially nothing." He stood up, walking around the table to look me up and down with absolute disdain. He told me I didn't fit the picture anymore. He mocked my $40,000 salary and my lack of ambition. He called me deadweight. He had no idea that while he was playing the role of the sole provider, I had been quietly paying half the mortgage through a discreet trust to maintain his ego. As he told me I had until midnight to leave, a woman descended our spiral staircase. She was young, blonde, and wrapped in my ivory silk robe, a custom piece I'd bought in Milan. This was Vanessa, a corporate attorney from Cole and Partners. She stood by Bradley, looking at me with pity. She told me to leave quietly, mocking my income and claiming her hourly fee was equal to my monthly salary. She told me I couldn't afford a lawyer to fight them. It got worse. Bradley showed me his phone. Our joint accounts were at zero. He had moved every cent to a private account and frozen my credit cards. He claimed he was protecting his assets, asserting that my administrative salary had contributed nothing. He even claimed I had no equity in the penthouse, saying my $80,000 contribution 5 years ago was legally a gift, not an investment. I didn't cry. My analytical mind, the mind that hunts criminals, took over. I let them see a broken woman. I played the part of the defeated wife perfectly. I grabbed a single, unassuming black suitcase, the one containing my encrypted hard drives and federal credentials, and walked out into the rain. The moment the elevator doors closed, the mask slipped. My posture straightened, and a razor-sharp focus took hold. Bradley thought he had outmaneuvered a data entry clerk. He had no idea he had just declared war on a woman who dismantles financial empires for breakfast. Under the cover of a parking garage, I pulled out my encrypted ghost phone, a device Bradley didn't know existed. I called my operations manager, Cameron. Initiate a Level 4 forensic audit protocol immediately, I commanded. Target is Bradley Reed. I want every transaction, every offshore account in the Caymans, and every encrypted email. I want his entire financial existence dissected. Bradley had just signed a document claiming sole ownership of all assets. In his arrogance, he didn't realize he had also just legally claimed sole responsibility for the millions of dollars in undeclared offshore funds and tax liens I had been tracking. He had tied the noose around his own neck. For days later, I was forced to return for the only thing I truly valued, a silver locket belonging to my late mother. Bradley knew I'd come for it. I drove my modest sedan to his mother Patricia's estate, where the entire Reed family was gathered for Sunday dinner. I stood in the doorway of the dining room. Patricia, dripping in diamonds, didn't offer me a seat. Instead, she used the moment to humiliate me further in front of Vanessa, who was already sitting in my chair at the table. Patricia called me a stray dog, a charity case with no pedigree. She slammed her hand on the table and declared that the Reed family needed a brilliant lawyer like Vanessa, not a boring nobody like me. I stood there, silent, recording every insult. They thought they were winning. They had no idea that the game hadn't even truly begun. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the grand dining room. Bradley took a slow, methodical sip of his vintage wine, his eyes dancing with delight as he watched his mother deliver what he believed was my final verbal execution. Across the table, Trent snickered into his bourbon, shaking his head at my supposedly pathetic state, while Vanessa looked on with an expression of pure, unadulterated triumph. She truly believed she had secured her throne in their wealthy dynasty. They all thought they had finally broken me. They believed that weaponizing my painful childhood in the foster care system would shatter my resolve and send me fleeing in tears. They wanted to remind me of my lowly place in their manufactured social hierarchy, treating my past like a stain they had graciously tried to scrub away. But I wasn't looking at Patricia, and I certainly wasn't looking at Bradley. My gaze briefly flickered to Naomi. The sharp-minded woman hadn't touched a morsel of her food. She sat perfectly still, her face a mask of neutrality, but her knuckles were white as she gripped the silk napkin in her lap. She was the only one not laughing. She was the only one who realized that cornering an animal with nothing left to lose was a fatal, irreversible mistake. I finally shifted my eyes back to Patricia. I didn't cry or scream. Instead, I offered her a slow, terrifyingly calm smile, a look so cold that her self-righteous expression faltered for a fraction of a second. "You are absolutely right, Patricia," I said, my voice dropping an octave into a tone of chilling authority I usually reserved for hostile witnesses in federal court. "This family is going to need a brilliant lawyer very, very soon." I turned my attention to Bradley, holding out my hand with steady fingers. The locket. Now. For a moment, Bradley looked unsettled by my total lack of emotional distress. The pathetic wife wasn't following the script. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out the tarnished silver chain, and tossed it carelessly across the table. It slid over the polished mahogany and stopped right at the edge. I picked it up, enclosing the cool metal safely in my palm. Without another word, I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit, leaving them to their arrogant delusions. They had just thrown gasoline onto a fire they couldn't hope to extinguish. I had barely reached the arched entryway when a heavy, aggressive hand clamped down on my shoulder. Before I could react, Trent stepped into my path, his large frame blocking the door. The stench of expensive bourbon and stale cigar smoke radiated from him in waves. With a vicious swipe, he snatched the locket out of my hand and held it high above my head, out of reach. His bloodshot eyes were wide with a malicious, drunken amusement. "Not so fast, you pathetic little mouse," Trent slurred, a cruel grin spreading across his flushed face. "You think you can just strut in here, insult my mother, and walk out with your pride intact? I saw that rusted, 5-year-old eyesore you parked in the driveway. It's an embarrassment to have that junk on our property. You are a joke, Cassidy. You always have been." The dining room erupted into a fresh chorus of laughter. Patricia clapped her manicured hands, thoroughly enjoying the spectacle of her eldest son bullying a woman he deemed inferior. Vanessa let out a high-pitched giggle, leaning into Bradley as if they were watching a private theatrical performance. "If you think you're so tough," Trent challenged, waving the locket tauntingly, "why don't you take us to court? Go ahead, sue my brother for half his assets. I dare you. Let's see how far your pathetic salary gets you against a firm like Cole and Partners. You'd be bankrupt before the first filing." I kept my face a blank slate, staring at Trent's chest. I didn't look up at the necklace. I was busy filing away the exact legal definitions of theft and coercion. I was recording the details of his aggressive physical contact for the criminal charges that would inevitably follow his impending financial ruin. Bradley pushed his chair back and stood up. He picked up a fresh, oversized crystal glass filled with deep red wine and walked slowly toward me. His expensive leather shoes were silent on the hardwood as he stopped beside his brother, looking at me with pure contempt. "My brother is right, Cassidy," Bradley said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "You've gotten entirely too comfortable speaking out of turn. You need a harsh reminder of exactly where you stand in the real world." Without a hint of hesitation, Bradley tilted his wrist. The dark crimson wine poured from the glass, splashing violently across the front of my gray cardigan and soaking my white blouse. The cold liquid seeped into the fabric instantly, chilling my skin. The stains bloomed like open wounds across my chest. The room exploded into cruel laughter. Patricia let out a delighted gasp, mocking shock while her eyes gleamed with malice. Vanessa smiled smugly, crossing her arms, savoring the public degradation. Even the housekeeper turned away, retreating into the kitchen to avoid the sight of such brutal humiliation. I didn't flinch. I didn't try to wipe the dripping wine from my ruined clothes. I stood perfectly still, letting the liquid pool on the floor. My mind was a steel trap. They wanted a reaction. They wanted me to scream or beg. I refused to give them a single drop of satisfaction. Vanessa stood up gracefully and walked to a console table near the foyer. She picked up a legal document and a heavy gold pen, her heels clicking rhythmically as she approached me. "This is a comprehensive waiver of marital assets," Vanessa stated with professional arrogance. "It legally strips you of any right to alimony, support, or equity in the penthouse. It is completely binding. Bradley had me draft it this morning." Bradley took the locket from Trent, dangling the delicate chain in front of my face. "Here are your options, Cassidy," he said coldly. "Take this pen, sign the line, and give up any greedy delusions about my money. Do that, and I give you this cheap piece of junk back. Refuse, and I drop this into the garbage disposal tonight and grind it into silver dust. The choice is yours." I looked at the document. My forensic legal training instantly dissected the scene. Signing a waiver while covered in spilled wine, surrounded by hostile actors, and under the explicit threat of property destruction, was the textbook definition of signing under duress. Any judge would toss this into the trash in 30 seconds. It was legally worthless garbage. But they were too blinded by narcissism to see their massive procedural error. They wanted submission. I took the pen, pressed the paper against the console table, and signed with a perfectly steady hand. Vanessa snatched the document away with a victorious smirk. Bradley laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound, and instead of handing the locket to me, he dropped it onto the floor. It clattered against the wood by my wet shoes. "Good girl," Bradley sneered, turning his back. "Now get out of my mother's house before you stain the rugs." I slowly knelt and picked up the silver locket, brushing a speck of dust from it before clasping it tight. As I stood, my eyes locked onto Naomi. She was still at the table, her hands clenched so hard her knuckles were white, her eyes blazing with fury at her own husband and his family. She gave me a fraction of a nod, a silent confirmation. The alliance was formed. I walked out into the cold night, wine-soaked clothes clinging to my skin. They thought they had won a war by winning a petty, pathetic battle. They had no idea I was already drafting the federal indictments that would burn their empire to the ground. Before I could reach the front door, a violent crash echoed from the dining room. Naomi had accidentally knocked over a massive glass water pitcher, sending a tidal wave of ice water onto Trent's lap. In the ensuing chaos, Naomi stumbled backward and grabbed my arm with an iron grip. "I am so clumsy tonight," Naomi announced loudly, her voice cutting over Trent's swearing. "Let me help you with that wine stain, Cassidy. The kitchen has club soda. Come with me right now." She practically dragged me through the swinging doors into the chef's kitchen, cutting off the noise of the dining room. The room was empty. The second we were alone, Naomi's facade dropped. The subservient daughter-in-law was gone. She stood tall, her eyes glowing with calculating intelligence. She shoved a damp cloth into my hands and leaned in, her voice a razor-sharp whisper. "I know you signed that garbage waiver just to get the necklace back," she said, dead serious. "But listen to me. Do not sign anything in front of a judge. They are bleeding you dry, Cassidy. They are moving capital faster than you can imagine." She told me she had seen Bradley receiving secure courier packages at the estate to avoid digital tracking, packages from the Cayman Islands. My heart skipped a beat. The Caymans, the holy grail of money laundering. I had been looking for a physical anchor for my audit, and Bradley was arrogant enough to bring a paper trail to his mother's house. "They're hiding millions," Naomi whispered. "Bradley and Vanessa are setting up shell companies, and Trent is helping because he owes money to bookies. They want you to walk away with nothing." I looked at her, searching her eyes. "Why tell me this?" I asked. "You're married to Trent. If they go down, he goes with them." Naomi scoffed. "Trent is already draining my savings for his gambling. This family is a rotting, sinking ship. They treat us like disposable accessories. I refuse to go down with them." "I know you're planning something, Cassidy. I see how you watch them." She was handing me the master key to Bradley's vault. We were two outsiders, underestimated and determined. I asked her if she knew where the documents were. She told me Bradley had a hidden biometric safe in the home office. She didn't have the code, but she knew when he accessed it. "Arrogance breeds fatal mistakes," I told her, dropping the cloth. "Thank you for the water." Naomi nodded and instantly shifted back into her polite persona, leading me back out. Bradley and Vanessa were still laughing, oblivious to the fact that Naomi had just nailed their coffins shut. I walked back into the dining room one last time to leave. They expected me to slink away in shame. Instead, I walked straight to the head of the table. When Bradley reached for the locket to taunt me again, I reached out and snatched it from his hand with a precision that left him stunned. "You have your garbage waiver," I said, my voice ringing with authority. "And I have what is mine. Don't ever hold my mother's memory hostage again." As Patricia screamed insults after me, I walked out into the rain. Inside my car, a predatory smile finally broke across my face. I pulled out my secure phone and called Cameron. "I have the anchor," I told him. "Narrow the search to the Caymans. Cross-reference the routing with courier manifests to Patricia's address." The sound of Cameron's rapid typing filled the car. "The firewall is collapsing," he reported. "We are in. The shell companies are opening like a book. He's moving millions." The next morning, I sat in my real office on the 42nd floor of a secure high-rise, the headquarters of Apex Forensics. My chief of staff, Lauren, walked in with a smirk. "Director, we have a call on the cover line," she said. "It's Bradley Reed. He's calling Oakwood Data Solutions." He wasn't satisfied with throwing wine. He wanted to get me fired, so I'd be completely destitute. I told Lauren to answer as the HR manager while I monitored the call. Bradley's voice filled the room, dripping with fake concern. He told Lauren that I had a severe gambling problem and had been siphoning thousands from his accounts. He claimed I was a liability who would steal client data. He was trying to destroy the only life he thought I had left. Little did he know, he was speaking to a room full of federal analysts who were currently watching his entire criminal empire unravel on their screens. The atmosphere inside courtroom 4B was thick with the stench of perceived supremacy. I stood just outside the heavy oak doors, listening to the muffled echoes of their overconfidence filtering through the wood. Peering through the narrow glass panel, I saw them perfectly aligned in the gallery. Bradley sat with his legs crossed, checking his luxury watch and whispering into Vanessa's ear, prompting a sharp, grating laugh. Patricia sat rigidly beside them, draped in cashmere and diamonds, looking as if the very air of the courtroom was beneath her. Trent slouched at the end of the bench, nervously tapping his foot, oblivious to the fact that his domestic fraud had already triggered a federal lock on his accounts. They were a portrait of arrogant privilege, gathered to watch what they believed would be my final financial execution. I took a slow, steadying breath and pushed the doors open. I was no longer wearing a faded gray cardigan or clutching a cheap tote bag. I stepped into the room wearing a flawlessly tailored charcoal power suit that commanded immediate respect. My hair was pulled back into a severe, sleek twist, and my posture projected the freezing authority of a woman who directed federal investigations. The rhythmic clicking of my stilettos echoed like gunfire against the marble floor. Every head in the gallery turned. The laughter died in Vanessa's throat. Patricia's mouth fell open, her eyes darting over the designer cut of my suit. Bradley's smug expression fractured into profound confusion. They expected a weeping victim. They were entirely unprepared for the apex predator walking down the center aisle. I bypassed the gallery and walked through the wooden gate. Jonathan Cole stood at the petitioner table, organizing his intimidating stacks of briefs. He looked up, his eyes narrowing as he registered my transformation. I didn't nod or greet him. I walked to the respondent table, placed my reinforced leather briefcase down with a solid thud, and took my seat. The bailiff called the room to order as Judge Monroe emerged. A respected veteran of the federal bench, he was known for his intolerance for theatrics. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the docket. "We are here for the asset division in the matter of Reed versus Reed," Judge Monroe stated. He looked at my table, furrowing his brow at my lack of counsel. "Mrs. Reed, who is representing you today?" I stood up, buttoning my jacket. "I am appearing pro se, Your Honor. I will be representing myself in all matters pertaining to this divorce." Jonathan Cole let out a loud, theatrical scoff. He stood abruptly, vibrating with condescending outrage. "Your Honor, this is a complex, high-asset divorce. Mrs. Reed is a remote data entry clerk with zero legal training. Her decision to appear pro se is a waste of time and a stalling tactic." Cole paced aggressively, commanding the room. My client made a generous $10,000 offer, which the respondent refused after an emotional breakdown. She is fundamentally incapable of understanding the legal reality or the vocabulary of discovery. I formally request the court dismiss her claims immediately. She is out of her depth, and we demand summary judgment. In the gallery, Patricia hummed in satisfaction. Bradley leaned forward, his arrogance restored by his attack dog. They thought Cole had delivered the fatal blow. I didn't interrupt. I let him dig his professional grave before I dropped the federal guillotine. Judge Monroe looked at Cole and then shifted his calculating gaze to me. "Mrs. Reed, opposing counsel has made a forceful motion to dismiss based on your supposed inability to comprehend these complexities. Do you have a response?" I did not flinch. I unlatched my briefcase with a sharp, definitive click. I pulled out a thick, securely bound stack of documents. The brilliant red seal of the federal special master gleamed under the lights. "Your Honor," I began, my voice echoing with authority. "I am not here to argue over an insulting $10,000 settlement. I would like to formally submit a comprehensive financial discovery exhibit, Forensic Accounting Report number 402, regarding the massive illicit hidden assets of Bradley Reed." Jonathan Cole burst into a mocking laugh. Behind me, Bradley and Vanessa chuckled, and Patricia sighed in disgust. Cole stepped toward the center of the room. "Your Honor, I object to this circus. My client is a respected director. His disclosures are pristine. Now his unemployed wife wants to submit a fabricated spreadsheet she likely printed at a library. She probably watched a documentary and decided to play investigator. It is pathetic." The bailiff took my report and placed it on the judge's desk. Cole pointed a manicured finger at it. "We refuse to acknowledge this garbage. This is a federal court. We deal in ironclad facts. My firm retains elite organizations like Apex Forensics because they represent the gold standard. We do not accept trash created by a woman who files paperwork for a living." I stood perfectly still. The irony hung heavy in the air. Jonathan Cole had just validated the exact weapon I had placed on the desk. He had demanded the court rely on the specific agency I personally directed. I completely agree with counsel, I said smoothly, looking Cole in the eye. A federal court should never rely on garbage. It should only trust verified data extracted directly from the Cayman Island shell company's Mr. Reed operates. The words Cayman Island acted like a physical blow. The laughter died. The air grew thin. Cole opened his mouth to object, but the words died as Judge Monroe picked up the document. He stared at the red seal and the bold signature beside it. A devastating stillness settled over the judge's features. Cole, misinterpreting the silence, puffed out his chest to continue his monologue. Judge Monroe slowly removed his glasses and looked at him with profound pity. "Counselor Cole," the judge began, "you just spent 5 minutes defending the integrity of the federal oversight system. You named Apex Forensics as the gold standard." Cole smiled. "Yes, Your Honor. We respect their authority above all others." The judge did not smile back. Then I find myself in bewilderment. If you respect their authority, do you truly not recognize the woman standing across from you? The smile on Cole's face froze. He turned to look at me, really look at me, and a flicker of primal unease breached his facade. In the gallery, the whispers ceased. Bradley gripped the railing so hard his knuckles turned white. Judge Monroe struck his gavel with an explosive crack. "Let the record reflect that the respondent is not a data entry clerk. She is Cassidy Lawson, the Chief Executive Officer and Lead Forensic Accountant of Apex Forensics." The words hit like a shockwave. The judge continued, his voice carrying the weight of the government. "Furthermore, she is sitting before this bench as a special master appointed by the SEC. This document is a verified forensic audit regarding a money laundering and racketeering syndicate orchestrated by the petitioner." The courtroom went dead silent. I turned to face the gallery. Bradley looked like a corpse, the blood drained from his face. He finally realized he had invited the director of a federal task force into his home, married her, and handed her a notarized perjury confession. He had lost everything. Vanessa's facade shattered. She understood the legal implications of her own notary stamp on the fraudulent documents. She wasn't just a mistress, she was a co-conspirator in a RICO violation. Her hands shook so violently she dropped her files, paper spilling everywhere. Jonathan Cole recoiled from her as if she were on fire, realizing his firm was in the blast radius of a federal indictment. "Your Honor," I stated, turning back to the bench. "Section 1 of that report contains Bradley Reed's sworn affidavit from yesterday, where he denied offshore assets. Section 2 contains the decrypted ledgers proving he is laundering over $4 million. Section 3 outlines the fraudulent contracts drafted and signed by Vanessa to shield these crimes behind attorney-client privilege." Jonathan Cole stammered, frantically withdrawing his representation of Bradley. Judge Monroe ignored him, his eyes locked on the two criminals. "Bradley Reed, you have committed documented perjury and utilized this court to conceal a racketeering operation." The judge nodded to the armed federal bailiffs. "Take them into custody." The bailiffs moved with tactical speed. One slammed Bradley against the table, the metallic click of handcuffs echoing in the silence. Vanessa fell to her knees, sobbing hysterically about being a lawyer. "Not anymore," the judge said with disgust. "I am recommending your permanent disbarment. Put her in irons." As the second set of cuffs clicked shut, Trent realized the report likely contained his gambling debts and money laundering trails. Panic took over. He bolted for the exit, but he didn't make it 3 steps. Naomi stepped gracefully into the aisle, her foot perfectly placed to trip him, sending him sprawling. As the officers descended on him, Naomi looked at me with a satisfied nod. I picked up my briefcase and walked out of the courtroom, leaving the ruins of the Reed legacy behind. The quiet wife was gone, the predator had finished her work.